My first panel guest is Ryan Holman. I've had the privilege of working on another project with him over the years. You might recognize Don't Guess Test. We partnered with Foundation Medicine and some other people and created that program, which is still alive and well today. Ryan, can you tell us about your background and the work of Friends of Cancer Research?
Sure, and thank you, Bonnie, and thank you, Lori. It's an honor to be here today with all of you, representing so many amazing people that are willing to come to Washington and really have the voices that need to be heard. So it's an honor for me to sit here with all of you and with heroes in our community like Bonnie and Lori, so thank you. My background prior to joining Friends of Cancer Research was a little bit in politics. I worked for Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle from South Dakota back when a time of bipartisanship was a common occurrence, not a rare occurrence. What you're doing tomorrow will be exciting and important because what you're talking to them about is not a partisan issue, and it can never be a partisan issue. So after my time in politics, working for a few individuals, I joined Lombardi Cancer Center, Georgetown Medical Center, working on unique partnerships and ways to get funding to research projects at the Cancer Center in a more collaborative way. From there, I joined Friends of Cancer Research about 9 years ago, and I've been there ever since. And Friends of Cancer Research, I will echo what Bonnie says. Everything we do is rooted in collaboration, and we fully believe as well that you can't get anything done, especially in this town, without first starting with partners and collaborators. We focus primarily on the regulatory space, an often overlooked area, but that's so important in getting therapies to the patients that so desperately need them. We've focused on the FDA and are strong supporters of that regulatory agency and working with them in unique and innovative ways to try to get therapies through to patients. And this has been in the realm of direct regulatory changes or innovative new clinical trials. And one thing I'm honored to have led with Friends of Cancer Research in partnership with Bonnie and Lung Cancer Alliance and other lung cancer organizations is the launch of an innovative lung cancer trial that you may or may not have heard of called LungMap. That launched 3 years ago now, is now available at over 700 sites across the country, and we enrolled over 2,000 patients, so we're very happy about that.
LungMap was an amazing new way to do clinical trials, allowing, and jump in here if I misstep, allowing patient to go from one arm to the other as they either progress or, have issues on one therapy or another. Absolutely brilliant collaborative research.
And it was, we got, and I'll give Bonnie some credit on this. We got 5 pharmaceutical companies to join on one trial. Never been done before. Right. So talk about collaboration.
Right. Exactly. So very, very, very good stuff. And to Ryan's point too, more therapies and drugs have been approved in the last 18 months for lung cancer than in the last 4 decades. And that is with amazing help from Friends of Cancer Research, others, and the FDA. So we really have to give them a shout out as well for joining the cause.
Absolutely.
Right. Ryan, can you describe the climate that exists today to advance and accelerate research and breakthroughs?
So the climate, and if we can all we're sitting in Washington, but let's put politics aside completely.
Right.
The climate in Washington, the climate within the regulatory space is actually, as Bonnie just illustrated, of the amount of therapies that have been approved is awesome right now, for lack of a better term. The breakthrough therapy designation that started at the FDA, one of the works of Friends of Cancer Research as well, has really seen so many therapies. When we first passed it, and you all know this, you were part of this, they thought, oh, we'd see like 1 or 2 therapies a year. They didn't think the pipeline was as robust, especially for lung cancer. And now we've seen over 150 designations and 61 drugs approved just in the past 5 years, many, many, many in lung cancer. And what you're seeing with the leadership that we have, luckily, still at the NIH with Dr. Francis Collins, and now newly at the FDA with Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who is a cancer survivor himself, who really understands the need of the community and will listen to the community. The agency, the FDA, is willing to look at new innovative ways, but also we're no longer just using a patient as a token seat on a panel. They are listening because of hearing voices like yours and Bonnie's and all of ours over the years. They're actually listening, and patient input in the drug development process has never been more exciting and is starting to be institutionalized in pharmaceutical companies, in research agencies. They're not starting a clinical trial until they talk to a patient first about what they really need and what an outcome really means to them. So it's very exciting right now.
It's really, really good news. I've been known to say to some of these folks, we're not just arm candy, that you can, show, look, we've got a patient too, like someone with, a little puppet. And I can say that I myself am going to be embedded in a major pharmaceutical company starting Monday, and I'm going to be sitting in on their entire research program for their new drug every day, every minute until it happens. So we aren't just arm candy. They are listening, and we are all getting an opportunity to have our voice heard at the table. Ryan, what new frameworks, legislation, partnerships, programs are emerging to shape new opportunities and new ways to collaborate and new ways to do research?
So I think last year you saw a large amount of momentum within the cancer community and other disease organizations coming together around what was called the 21st Century Cures Act. And that was a extremely large bill that not only addressed basic science and NIH funding, but really forced the hands of a lot of organizations towards collaboration. And you saw, and this is something that Francis Collins has talked about for decades, but you saw finally government saying, we're not going to fund this research unless it becomes and starts as a collaborative nature. And data sharing is something that is going to be required, not requested anymore. And I think a big outcome of that is something you'll start to see very soon, as a lot of these researchers that have brilliant work across the country but have remained in silos for so many years are starting to open up and share with each other and not worry about, it's all about, especially in this town, if you don't care about getting credit yourself for what you accomplish, you can get a heck of a lot done.
No fooling. No fooling. And I had a couple of other questions, but we already addressed a little bit in the patient voice and how important that is today, everywhere, in every step of from research to actual care. But I've got a couple statistics I'm going to give you, and I'd like you to comment on them because I think these are our real problems. If 80% of all cancer patients, not just lung, are being treated in the community environment, access is a huge, huge issue to all this new research and care. And the other statistic, you might know, you might not, this might be new. If 50% of all clinical trials in the United States happen in just 10 states, how are we going to get accrual where it needs to be to make all of this happen?
That's a new statistic for me.
I knew it. Look it up. It's real.
So your first statistic about the community setting is something that is hugely important, and having, going back to personal experiences, and when I worked for Senator Daschle, I moved to I'm from Pennsylvania and went to school in North Carolina, but I moved to South Dakota. Okay, and I didn't realize how much access to basic medical care was an issue until I saw it firsthand there, and not even talking about clinical trials. So taking that experience, and I use that in that, you can go 800 miles before you hit a hospital that can take care of you, and those individuals, they weren't even worried about whether they could go to a specialist. They just wanted to go to a 4-room hospital that once a week an oncologist, a general oncologist, showed up, and they relied on that individual to have all of the knowledge out there in the world. And those people worked their butts off, but did everything they could. But did that patient have access to the best care they could? Absolutely not. What's evolved over time, and I think as pharmaceutical companies start to step up to the plate more, and better awareness is out there, and like you said, access. You look at, we'll take LungMap as an example. The 700 sites that I spoke of that it's open across the country is because we were able to use this common platform, and we're able to share resources, and that the companies agreed to go on to this one trial. 60% of our accrual, now entering into 70%, I don't know if I'm allowed to share that, but there you go, has come from community settings. The community physicians are thrilled about the fact that they have access to this. So I think if we're ever going to hit this issue, it's going to take the companies willing to go out there in the community settings. Academic medical centers, these major institutions are fantastic, don't get me wrong. They're doing amazing research, but the need is so far out there, and companies and organizations need to start thinking way outside the box in how we get those therapies and those innovative trials to the settings that need them most.
Exactly, and could you see the social media being included in actually finding the patients to accrue for these trials as well?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. That awareness that a trial may or may not even exist could get your doctor to bring that trial to you. There are one patient, one site
Right.
arms of a trial that can occur just from a patient being motivated and hearing about it from social
Virtual
media.
tumor boards.
Yes.
From the major academic centers to the community centers to help them with those hard cases. And,
Absolutely.
Innovation, 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 collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. Okay? It's starting with us. Now we have to get it to the top. Thank you, Ryan. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Our next speaker, Jennifer King, Director of Science and Research at LCA. Can you share your background and how you have focused LCA's research agenda? We can share. You're not on either. Here. We'll share. We'll just go back and forth.
Thanks.
See, collaboration. You just saw it there.
Exactly. So my background, I'm actually a cancer researcher by training. I have a PhD in molecular biology and worked in the lab itself at UCLA as well as at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. But then I left the lab a number of years ago and worked for an oncology society. Working on, when I was in the lab, it was much more bench research, understanding how the biology of cancer worked. Then I moved to the American Society of Clinical Oncology, ASCO, where I was exposed to a lot of clinical research, clinical trials, patient-based studies versus the lab research, as well as some health IT projects that I worked on. And then came to LCA about 2.5 years ago, which has been an amazing experience because it was able to really reframe for me a lot of the research knowledge that I had. So it gives me the ability to look at some of the problems from a more patient-focused angle. How do these things that we were looking at, these molecular pathways, what questions really matter to the patients, to the patient community, and what can make a true difference? And it's been a great experience and really gratifying. We use, as Ryan set me up fantastically about science of patient input, we use patient input every day, both to inform our research agenda, as well as we were speaking about, we're getting more and more and more requests for, we want patients, we want advocates to really participate to help shape these studies and to be able to comment on how the studies are going to go, what's important, what are the important outcomes, and simple things like you shouldn't require that many biopsies. No one's going to want to go on that study. There's things that when patients look at a research protocol, they think about very differently than the researchers in the lab who might be thinking, I need this many time points. So for me, it's really great to be able to see and balance both sides of the equation. And LCA, I think, looks at research a little bit differently than some of the other foundations out there in that we are not a funder. We really view ourselves as a catalyst to research. We contribute patient voice. We contribute the expertise of our staff. We contribute resources that we have, like our Screening Centers of Excellence program, to research collaborations, research projects, and we try to do everything, as we've been talking about, in collaborative partnership with academic centers, with corporate entities across the board.
What do you think about the fact that translational medicine has always said from the bench to the patient and back to the bench? I'm kind of the ilk that transformational medicine could be from the patient to the bench and back to the patient, because it's the patients that offer their specimens. Where would research be if we didn't have the tissue and the blood and all the other specimens? I think that's, if we start thinking, for the pharma in the room and others, if we start thinking of just how valuable the patient is, not just by voice, but by physically being part of the solution. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I mean, a lot of the questions come from the community. We need to understand for the community. I also think it's a lot more, well, two things. One, I don't like bench to bedside, as almost everybody here. You nicely said bench to patient. We've said before, you know, patients don't want to be at the bedside. That's the whole point, even though that's the lingo you hear in most science settings, is bench to bedside. But it's really not a one-way path. It's going to be a continuous loop over and over and over again. And we've already seen that. We've seen a number of innovations in the lung cancer space. I think the whole story around EGFR targeted therapy is a great one, where it took understanding the science to develop the first generation of the drugs that can actually work on lung cancers that have EGFR mutations. But then the patients, when taking them, the cancers developed resistance. And so we, again, needed the patient samples. We needed to understand what was happening in a real patient to go back and develop what now there's approved second generation drugs, and there's third and fourth generation drugs on the way. So it's always going to be an interplay back and forth.
Exactly, exactly. Where do you think the greatest opportunities for partnerships are to maximize all of the things we've just spoken about now?
I think there's lots and lots of opportunities. I mean, today, I think everyone thinks is a great example of all of us coming together to be able to talk about this. I think the future of this space is that really we're going to see, it's so exciting. There's been so many advances, as we talked about, that it's really hard for the science to even keep up, because right now we're seeing so many potential combination options of the new therapies. One of the directions that the research is going is, you know, we now have new immunotherapies, new targeted therapies, but how do you give these? Can you give them together? Are there different kinds of immunotherapies? There's so many potential combinations as the new science evolves that nobody's going to be able to do it alone. We have to have innovative trial designs like LungMap. We have to have partnerships. A great example from LCA is we have a program called LungMatch, which is a nonprofit corporate partnership where we're actually bringing molecular testing directly to patients. Patients can call and start the molecular testing process themselves, no matter where they are in the country, and we can bring that to them instead of, you know, they don't feel that they're receiving care because they're in the middle of South Dakota or wherever that may be. And we couldn't have done that alone, and quite honestly, some of our partners couldn't have done it alone either. It needs to be the patient entity with the corporate entity to make that collaboration work, and there's many other examples out there, I think probably across all of our realms.
Exactly. I think we could, you know, have a panel just talking about that. And, you know, how do you think we can get the word out, especially to pharmaceutical companies and industry partners, what an important role we all play in this whole process? And I think it's much more important than you've ever imagined. You know, even our education programs with being able to teach patients to be able to be smarter than that community physician, so they could go in there and have shared voices. What can we do to get industry to partner more with assets, with funding? You know, I think they have so much they can bring to the table. And what can we do to generate a lot more interest? Should we get one of them up here to us?
I do think it's happening. I mean, I feel like I've seen a noticeable shift just in the 2.5 years that I've been there. Ryan mentioned it as well, that, you know, there is a lot more recognition already. There's organizations, I mean, Faster Cures started a science of patient input project. Many, many more people are talking about this. So I think the tide is really turning.
I think the tide is turning, but we can't get caught up in this quagmire that's happening right now between insurance and cost and all of those things, because I really believe getting the right therapy to the right patient at the right time can save a lot of money. What can we do to get genomic profiling standard of care? What are the things we can do to really help ourselves? I think a think tank in some form or fashion would be very valuable for us all coming together to make those things move quicker, remove those barriers. Yes? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. You are absolutely amazing. And Linda, you were supposed to be second, but I did this on purpose, so we would kind of go chronologically in order. Linda House is our next panelist. She's a nurse who are, you know, what would we do without nurses, really? Seriously. If we want to know what's going on in someone's clinic, ask the nurse. And she's also the president of Cancer Support Community. Share with us your background and the work of the Cancer Support Community and its Policy Institute.
Sure. Well, thank you for that very generous introduction. And, you know, I have to say that it's truly an honor for me to be here today doing this particular meeting. My background really goes back to the days of Alcase. And I remember making a visit to the office in Vancouver, Washington in those early days. And I also remember a time when we really brought together, I was 12 years at the bedside as an oncology nurse at a very, very pivotal point in time in the development of treatment. And then I spent 12 years with one of your sponsors, Lilly Oncology, doing all things consumer facing. And I remember vividly a meeting that we hosted at Lilly Corporate Center. Sheila Ross was there with us when we talked about the impact of stigma in lung cancer. And there was a decision made with the groups that were in the room at that time to launch really the first patient education piece for lung cancer. It was called Frankly Speaking About Cancer, Lung Cancer. And it was a collaborative effort where all of the groups agreed to hand out only that piece to patients with lung cancer to really sort of tackle this idea around stigma and having a common voice around that. And why it's come full circle for me is now I'm with the Cancer Support Community, which was one of the 3 organizations that agreed to do that. So it's such an honor to be here. And the Cancer Support Community, just to give you a sense, is a 35-year-old organization. It is the combination of the wellness community and Gilda's clubs. We now have 170 locations throughout the United States, and our focus is on the social and emotional impact of cancer on the patient and their families. So we do one-on-one counseling, we do education programming, we do support groups, we do clinical research. So we do have a lung cancer registry, and I have brought some of the stats from our lung cancer registry that may be helpful for you tomorrow as you go on the Hill, but really try to understand what the patient is experiencing from start to finish of their cancer journey. And we're very blessed to be able to have longstanding relationships with your organization, with your organization, and with the Lung Cancer Alliance. So thank you for having me today.
Well, that's amazing. What does value-based healthcare mean to you?
So, so we've done a lot of work in value-based healthcare, and we introduced a question into our cancer experience registry in 2013, and that question was, when thinking about your cancer experience, how do you define value? Because we really felt like it was important to hear from the patient how they define value, and we had a call with ICER today to continue this theme of how do we continue to evolve this patient voice in value. And the reality is that value is very individual to the patient. And it is very individual to the patient at their point of asking the question. So if you're asking a younger, newly diagnosed patient, the way in which they'll define value is much different than the way in which somebody who may be on a third or fourth line therapy and maybe a little bit older may define value. But it's very clear in some of the points that we've been able to uncover that when a patient is faced with a treatment decision, we sort of attach this dollar sign to the product that they're receiving. But patients, when given the option to say, I'm going to think about my quality of life, my length of life, and how much it's going to cost me, right? When they look at those three attributes when they're thinking about making a treatment decision, hands down, every time, quality of life wins. Hands down, quality of life wins. The discrepancy is when you look at the people that are thinking about value, the two factors that they're looking at, length of life and how much does it cost. So there's a huge disconnect in the way that the formal framework developers and the conversation around value has connected to the patient in the fact that it hasn't really connected to the patient.
Exactly. Do you have anything you're going to be working on to change that?
We are. So we've done a number of studies. We'll be releasing this report on QALY, because there's so many of the insurers are really looking at QALY as a measure for payment. So we've gone to patients and we've said, what do you think about QALY? Did you even know about QALY? Oh, by the way, your payment is being based on QALY, right, as an endpoint, and decisions are being made around that. But we've taken our research even deeper on something that's going to be just really cool, and it's called the VOICE Project, and it stands for Valued Outcomes in the Cancer Experience. And we are now working to create a validated tool that'll be used by clinicians and researchers at different points in time to really say, okay, Bonnie, right, here you are now, we have this decision to make about your care. Let us talk about what are your valued outcomes and how can I, as a physician, meet you where you are instead of what the guidelines are telling me or what this pathway is telling me or what I think I should be doing for you. So stay tuned. That's a lot of work to get that validated, but we're well in the process of making that happen, and we'll be launching that in the next year or so.
What do you think about shared decision-making processes between the patient and the physician, where they actually on day one sit down together and share what this journey looks like to them individually?
So I think that measures like this voice measure will encourage that to happen. We also have a program called Open to Options, and for those of you who are patients in the room, I would encourage you at your next treatment decision point to really call us and go through this Open to Options process, which allows you to sort of work through what's important to you and go back to your physician with an agenda for the conversation, which should be happening all the time. It's not happening all the time. And interestingly enough, one of the stats that I pulled from our lung cancer experience registry was around involvement in their care planning. And 72% of the patients in the lung cancer registry, so this is different depending on the tumor type, but in the lung cancer registry, 72% of the patients said that they were involved in treatment decision making, but only around 30% said that they felt prepared to be involved in that treatment decision making process. So we have a long way to go from you have this type of cancer, these are a couple of options that are available to you, now move to my chemo suite and let's get you started, right, on immunotherapy or chemotherapy, whatever you're going to be started on, to, look, tell me what's important to you. Let's look at the options that are available to you. What are the toxicities associated with them? What are the out-of-pocket costs associated with them? And how do we make a decision that's really important to you? Yeah. The other piece is on cost, and I know that we'll raise this at some point in time, but patients with lung cancer, again, in the registry, a quarter of the patients in the registry are spending over $500 a month on out-of-pocket costs for treatments. Well, I should say for care. It's not just for their treatments, for their cancer care. And we know a lot of that is transportation. We know a lot of that is out-of-pocket costs for diagnostics, out-of-pocket costs for treatment. So there's a lot wrapped up in that figure. But the reality is that if you've got a quarter of the people, spending over $500 per month, there should be a conversation about how do we minimize that. Would you be willing to make a trade-off of, not having scans as frequently as we might do it by protocol, but you may not have answers around your, how you're reacting to therapies in a more rapid time. So those are the kind of real meaningful conversations that we need to have as a community, and I'm talking about capital C community, to talk about how we redesign care.
Right. I know our foundation has a lot of programs education programs to teach patients how to have that discussion with their physician. But we still haven't gotten nearly to as many as we need to, because I think that conversation should be had day one, moment one, along with the "you have cancer" discussion, and this is how we're going to talk now about what we can offer. What do you think we can all do together to get patients educated? And I'm talking about all cancer patients now, not just lung, but maybe lung can be a leader in this field about making that happen. Top down, bottom up?
Both. I think it has to be both. It can't be top down or bottom up. It has to be. It really has to be both. And I think each of the players or each of the stakeholders really has their own unique strengths to bring to this conversation. Again, I love the spirit of collaboration that is, in this room today, because I think that really is how we make it happen. It's not my tool that's better than your tool, that's better than your tool. It's right. How do we put the best tool in front of the person at the right time? And then how do we get people who are in decision-making positions to accept and to understand and to be a part of that conversation?
Right. Because it's scary to me to know that all of these new therapies are here and ready to be received by patients either via a clinical trial or they've already been approved in their standard of care. But patients are still not getting access to that because in very many cases the physicians aren't up to date with what's new. It's a huge issue. So do you think a collaborative team could work on this subject and make something out of that?
Oh, sure. I think one of the really interesting collaborative opportunities was when the immuno-oncology agents first hit the marketplace. And there were 4 organizations that really came together who all had different stakeholder groups that they touched, and there was sort of this gentleman's handshake agreement around, okay, I'm not going to compete or try to work where you really have a strength, so why don't we sort of all just do our thing and then maximize it, cross promote, make sure that people were aware of it. And that was a really important time because the immuno-oncology agents were so new to the market that it was just really important to get as much information out to as many stakeholders as possible so that they would know how to take care of patients in the best way that they possibly could. So, I use that as one of the best practices.
Thank you. That's all been amazing. We'd like to give the patients now an opportunity to ask us questions or ask questions of other people in the audience for a couple of minutes before the next panel comes up here. And we talked about how important the patient voice is, never more important than right now. There's a mic in the middle of the hallway. There you go. You don't need a mic. Yay.
Okay, so on 60 Minutes a few months ago, there was a great piece about the computer how processing 8,000 cancer research papers a day or some ridiculous thing and making the information therein available to anyone who can access it. The question is, are we aware that that is a possible thing, and can folks in South Dakota access that kind of information and tap into the results of those research projects?
No. And what they forgot to tell, well, I think they actually did mention that because I did watch that 60-minute episode. And when they gave the cost of the robot that was able to do this, it was nothing any of us could possibly ever afford. But I do believe that we are entering an era where information and getting information like that is growing on a daily basis, and that something like that will be available. Everybody is working on registries. We're working on gathering data feverishly, but then that data has to be collated. But there's many working on that, so it's coming.
And
I would tack on to the importance of patient participation and patient data sharing in a lot of those efforts. It's really interesting when you dig into the regulations around it and things like that, that there's a lot of disincentives for data sharing between hospitals, between research entities. Even though researchers want certain data sets, they often can't get it. As a patient, you control all of your data. You are not bound to the same privacy restrictions that your hospital may be. So it's a good opportunity and another way to participate along with clinical trials, along with other things, to be able to get involved in some of these efforts where you can share your data to big data type projects.
And it's important for that data to be shared, and a collaborative effort on gathering it and reconciling it.
Can I just add to that real quick? Because I just want to make sure that when we're talking about big data, so as a patient voice, make sure that the data that you're contributing is meaningful, right? So, when you think about the questions that are being asked and you think about a clinical trial, so right now clinical trials don't ask you about your experience, right? They don't know if you have to go in for treatment every week, what it costs you to take off work once a week, what it costs you to park every week. Those are the kind of metrics that we really need to advance the clinical science to start to capture, so we have a full picture of what the patient experience really is like in this journey. So if you're asked to participate, absolutely participate in clinical research and sharing your data, but also challenge the sponsor of that, whether it's the pharmaceutical industry, whether it's our registry, whether it's Lung Cancer Alliance registries. Why are you asking that question? That's irrelevant. You should be asking me about X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And really just understanding where your data is in the whole continuum, and understanding not only the clinical trials process, but the evolution within the FDA and as they're evaluating new therapies and what it means to you at those different points. I'll just do a quick promo of, we launched progressforpatients.org recently, and I'll leave with Lori an invitation for all of you to log in, and it's all about educating on the FDA experience and where a patient is so important at all these pivot points throughout the process. And the more you know, and the more you know about where your data can be so important in that process, the better. So.
And to that point, that leads me to another place where the patient is pivotal. I know that we are all working with various different pharmaceutical companies and biotech firms in redesigning patient consent forms and protocols, which is also another necessity. They're so ominous and arduous, and I think there's probably lots of other words to explain the difficulty it is even getting through that paperwork. So it can be done much easier.
Hi. Bonnie, you started off you stated two statistics. The first was that 80% of lung cancer patients get service in the
All
community.
cancer patients, all cancer patients.
Okay. And I missed the details on the second one because I couldn't pick my jaw up off the floor.
Okay. The second one is 50% of all the clinical trials in the United States happen in 10 states. And you know what those 10 states are.
Okay. Thank you.
Just start ticking them off. You've got them. This is your chance. Anything on your mind that we didn't talk about? You don't have to ask a question about something we spoke about.
Well, this is something which you have spoken about, and it's about education between patient and oncologist. Something that wasn't quite mentioned was in the initial visit when the patient is told you've got this horrible disease. The patient isn't listening. In the beginning, we're all just dumbstruck. And I have a lot of friends that have cancer, and not all of them have survived, and these are highly educated people, which leads me to the second point, and that is, even after they've been through a year or 6 months of their cancer, they're still dumbstruck and don't absorb information the way that they should. In this room, we have very motivated people, patients, caregivers, as well as professionals. So we get that. But a whole lot of people, the vast majority, I would argue, don't. They just are passive. It's like, do what you're supposed to do, and I'll just accept that. Obviously, we all know that's not quite the way it should be.
So I have a great answer to that. call the Lung Cancer Alliance, call the Bonnie J. Adario Lung Cancer Foundation, find a nurse navigator within your hospital's group if they have one. There is a system set up for that, and I think that's something we both do really, really, really well, is help the patient the day you're diagnosed and after they tell you you have cancer and give you a pile of paperwork to go get MRIs and CT scans and bone tests and all this other stuff that you don't even know why you're getting those. Call us. We'll help you through it, and we'll guide you and be with you the entire way.
And building awareness, going back to social media, if all of you in the room are motivated, building awareness within communities, support groups, chat rooms, Twitter, that it is an option to say no to your physician. It is an option to challenge your physician about something you just read or heard about. Embolden some of your fellow patients and advocates into that, because some people just don't think that's an option.
Right.
Exactly. And it's particularly important in our disease, because I do feel like that's even worse because of the stigma of the disease. People don't feel that they can speak up, don't feel that they have a voice. And we're seeing it a lot even with the testing program where the patient initiates testing. We've had so many people turn around and say, well, it sounds really interesting, but I don't want to tell my physician he's doing something wrong. Yes. And you're like, it's not that he's doing something wrong, it's that it's a conversation that you need to be having about, well, if I didn't get testing, why not? And they can test through us or not through us, but we want everyone to have the conversation.
I actually have a follow-up to his question. I'm Kay. You talked about that jaw-dropping statistic of 80% of cancer patients receive their treatment in community hospitals where you do not have specialties by cancer. You have an oncologist that treats all cancers. What are we as a community, capital C, doing to educate at the medical school level or beyond to try and get those community physicians ready for the empowered patient, or to be able to seek and find the information that they need?
I know Lung Cancer Alliance and ourselves and other advocacy groups are all working on that particular issue. And the physicians are starting to be really, really afraid of patients, which is awesome, because they know in most cases we know more about lung cancer than they do. You know, and I don't want to criticize, but the sad fact is that most of those community oncologists know a little bit about a lot of cancers. You know, ideally what a cancer patient needs to do is see somebody that knows everything about their cancer. And, you know, both Lung Cancer Alliance and ourselves and others will help you get to the right place. I think we're running, how much time do I have to have? 12 minutes. Awesome. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so those of you who know me, I'm Karen R. Scott. I'm from Pennsylvania, and I'm a physician and a survivor, and I teach at a medical school. So I guess it was, so it was all kind of set up appropriately, I think. But yeah, so I take it very seriously in trying to educate fellow physicians, which is pretty interesting, and especially medical students. And sometimes I have to do it secretively, like in my course, require reading about a patient with lung cancer, and the students don't even know that I'm trying to teach them something about it. But I loved when patients came to me with questions and knowledge. I did not like it when they came to me with a chip on their shoulder, just to say, you know what I mean? Like, I loved being in partnership with the patient. Yeah. What I got up here to ask, though, was, and I understand that there are multiple electronic health records out there. I am so frustrated by people who should be screened and who don't even know about it, and physicians who are not really aware of who should be screened. I mean, that's a huge group. So is there a way that we can get together and have on the electronic health record some kind of a pop-up that says this patient should be screened? I mean, I think that would be something that could do a wonderful thing. Again, physicians work very hard. They go through a lot of continuing medical education. But it's a challenge to keep up with everything, especially primary care physicians, to keep up with all of the changes between, you think of prostate screening has changed. In the last 10 years, it's probably changed 7 times. Breast cancer screen, everything's changing constantly. But in electronic health records, there could be a pop-up that tells them, you know, colon cancer screening, is it time for your colonoscopy? Is it time for your mammogram? Is it time for your lung cancer screening? That's what I think we need to work on. So thank you very much. It's good to see everybody here.
Totally, 100%. Yeah.
I'm a cancer survivor, and I'm brand new to this, so I've never been to one of these sessions before. And
Welcome.
Thank you. You've somewhat turned my thinking upside down, because I've always looked at it, and I've been fortunate that I feel I'm getting good care, but I've always looked at it from a perspective of find the best doctor, because I don't feel with how detailed this has gotten and how all the research and all the different things that are happening, how as a layperson, I could even compare my knowledge anywhere close to what a good doctor would have. So I take a much more cooperative perspective with my doctor, where he shares with me what he knows, so we have a back and forth and make decisions that way, as opposed to it being as patient-oriented as I'm hearing from everyone up there.
I think the easy answer to that question is this. If you needed heart surgery, you wouldn't be going to a podiatrist.
Correct.
Right? So if you need cancer treatment, you want to ask your physician if they're a specialist in your cancer. Right. And if they honestly answer you that they're not, what you should do is ask for a referral to someone that is a specialist.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Which is what I've done.
Okay, that's great.
So I'm saying when you do that, I guess you're saying people that are in a much more general situation. And if that's the case, then I understand.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
I would also say, like, and I'll speak for myself, if you're confident in your physician and the relationship is one of him sharing, he or she sharing information with you, and, you know, I'd encourage you to go, you know, look up some more information. But I think if you have confidence in your physician and their knowledge and feel like you are getting excellent treatment, stick with that. That's great. Feel free to challenge them, but it's not always the case that you need to challenge your physician. If you have that relationship, I think that there's a mechanism, and that's great, to continue that and support that. And like Bonnie said, if you're asking them and they are that expert, you know, then work with them as much as you can. You know, challenge them to show you clinical trials, challenge them by the next visit to show you more information on a specific therapy that he might have talked to you about. But it's okay to have confidence in your physician as well.
Thank you.
I think the whole idea around patient empowerment is, how do you help your physician or your care team know what's most important to you? And I don't know that that always happens in those early conversations, especially when it's sort of rapid fire, you know, interaction, dialogue, you've got to do this and this test and this thing. So I think that's really that's what's important. It's important for me that you explain this to me. It's important for me that you hear that this side effect is most important to me and I'd like to avoid this. Those are the things that are really important when you're having that conversation with your healthcare team broadly, not just your physician.
Yeah, I second that. I view it much less of a challenge as a conversation. You should be able to say, oh, why are you recommending that? Are there other options that you considered? And why did you pick this one? And have it as a conversation, and then be able to do your own homework.
Hi, I'm Dawn Horner. I live in Vancouver, Washington, and I actually have an oncologist who specializes in lung cancer in Seattle. I don't really have a question, just a comment, I guess, I want to share. I have a rare mutation, the exon 20 EGFR. And so when I was diagnosed 3 years ago, my hope was that a targeted therapy would be found. I actually found on Twitter the AP32788 drug. My oncologist hadn't heard of it yet. So for all of you out there that are doing your research and trying to find out, I think Twitter is a great resource, so I just wanted to share that. So anyway, that's just what I wanted to say.
That's a great example. You know, you have to be part of your own solution.
You do,
right?
and my oncologist is great. He's working with me, and actually there's a wait list. So I'm going a different route on a different drug. But anyway, I just think Twitter's great. I thought you all should.
That's
know.
great.
Hi, I'm Elaine Keller, and this is my first time here. I'm a 3-year lung cancer survivor. Yeah, I only have 2 more years to live, according to the statistics. I don't think so. I think you need to go one level higher than the physician, and especially in an HMO. Now, my husband was a federal employee. He was a cop on the U.S. Capitol Police Force, and we have some of the best health insurance you can possibly get your hands on. And we were members of Kaiser Permanente when we were younger, and now that we're both Medicare aged, we're in the Medicare Advantage version of Kaiser. And so I was only diagnosed, I was already in Medicare when I was diagnosed. And when I asked my doctor about clinical trials, she said, Kaiser doesn't participate in clinical trials. Why the heck not? And what can I, as just a patient down here, how can I influence this huge organization? And then one more thing, and it's related, and that's the testing. Kaiser has a super information system that patients can sign on to. We can send emails to our doctors, and we get these reminders about it's time for your mammogram and it's time for your colonoscopy. There's nothing in there about lung cancer screening. So, what ideas?
Well, welcome to our world.
Thank you.
Those are all things that need work. All of those things need work. And I think I can say there's a paradigm shift, and things are starting to happen because people really a few years back didn't know about all those barriers and that they even existed. So I think all of us are in line and working together to knock down those barriers and make change.
Okay.
And I think if you hear from an insurance company, Kaiser doesn't participate in clinical trials,
Yeah.
you're right, patients do. And if you talk to a physician, if there's a trial out there that might work for you and you talk to your physician and they have that trial, they'll find a way to pay for that. And a lot of clinical trials are covered and are required to be covered by law.
Right.
Luckily.
Well, luckily
that's-
I was only stage 1, so it wasn't a critical thing for me to get into.
But
a
still
clinical trial.
great questions to bring up, and this is where advocacy groups can help you as well. They can help you get the right answers to all of those questions. I think, Danielle, how much more time do we have? 5 more minutes? Okay.
Hi, my name is Tracey Murphy. I'm a lung cancer survivor. I was diagnosed in 2009 at age 39. Thank you. I was only given a 5% chance of 5 years, so being here is awesome. Unfortunately, it seems to run in my family. My grandfather died of it in 75 at 64. My mother was diagnosed in 2002 with stage 3B non-small cell, just like myself. She was given almost no chance, but she made it 14 years. She just passed just over a year ago. My question is, it's running in my family. 3 generations, it's taken 2. I'm still here. Probably because, hell's afraid I'm going to take over and God doesn't want, heaven doesn't want me. But, which is good for the cause. But my question is, my brother, my children. I was 39 at diagnosis. My son is 27. My daughter's 21. My brother's freaking out. But they don't qualify for screening. Now, we have a great family physician who every year since I was diagnosed asked my brother, how's that cough you're having? He goes, what cough? He goes, the cough that's been bothering you for like 3 weeks. I think we should get an x-ray. That's great. And now he's doing like a low dose every year, but insurance isn't paying for it. What can we do? Because there's so many people, I go to the Longevity Hope Summit each year. This is my first time here, so I'm really excited to be here. But we have a group photo of so many people under 50 years old that have been diagnosed with cancer with no risk factors. What are we doing? Is there anything that we are doing at this time?
There's a trial going on out there right now, or a study at Dana-Farber, run by Jeff Oxnard, and it's about inherited lung cancer. So that's definitely, you can get on their website and look into that. It's real, and it looks like it can be inherited. Obviously, they need to go a little bit further and get proof of that. But screening can also be, a good conversation with your physician, whether it be your primary physician or their primary physician, to explain the familial attachment to lung cancer and, demand a scan.
Yeah, he gets them every year. At least my brother does.
Yeah.
My son thinks he's invincible. He's 27.
Yeah.
But the insurance, they're fighting. They don't want to pay for it.
Well, sadly, they don't want to pay for anything.
Right.
So, it's constantly a battle, constantly a fight. Anybody?
Yeah, I'll add from a science perspective, and screening has been a huge topic around Lung Cancer Alliance for years. We were very involved in the coverage that there is now. We are really looking from a research perspective on how to expand the guidelines to cover things like family history. There's a group out there that currently doesn't cover non-smokers, but covers a broader category that includes family history and less years of smoking. What we need is the research studies to be completed to show that there's benefit, because there's obviously potential harms to doing screens if people aren't high enough risk. So the research is coming. At the same time, I think there's an exploding field of research of looking at early detection in different ways. So there's a number of both academic groups as well as corporate groups who are studying things like blood-based biomarkers for use for early detection. I know we're involved in a bunch of those studies. I think probably you are as well. I think that will change, but the science, unfortunately, isn't there yet.
Right.
So absolutely keep talking about it, absolutely keep bringing it up, bothering the insurance companies. Family history, we think absolutely should be included in risk guidelines, but it's coming. We're just trying to get the science to catch up with what we know needs to happen.
Great. Thank you.
No more.
So on the break, if the panelists will make themselves available for the final couple of questions.
Okay, we're out of time. Sorry, but we'll talk to you at the break. Okay, does that sound like a plan? Okay.
I think we need to give a round of applause to this extraordinary panel and to Bonnie. And it's wonderful that this will be able to live in perpetuity in the Living Room series. Be able to go back and look at this and listen, but just a great conversation. And I will close with "to be continued." Okay? Thank you.